When my son told me he'd fallen in love, I felt a strange pang, a mix of joy and caution. I had always been very close to him. I watched him pull himself up from nothing, build his name, his company, his fortune. He never let anyone help him financially, not even me. Everything he has, he earned with sheer effort, with sleepless nights, with years of sacrifice. That's why, when he told me he was in a serious relationship and wanted to bring his girlfriend to live with us in the mansion, I couldn't help but think about what that step truly meant. This wasn't just a casual relationship. If he was making the decision to bring her home, it was because he was convinced she was the woman he wanted to share his life with. Her name was Melina. I met her on an ordinary afternoon. My son arrived with her on his arm, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She was wearing an expensive dress, discreetly eye-catching, the kind that looks casual but costs more than a month's rent. Her makeup was perfect, as if she had just stepped out of a photo shoot. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach my heart. It was a smile that showed her teeth, but not her eyes. From that moment, I knew something was off. Melina was kind, polite, even affectionate with me. She called me ma'am, even though I told her several times she could just call me by my name. She seemed charming, and perhaps she was, but not with me. There was an invisible layer to her, a shield that only someone paying close attention could perceive. It was as if she were always acting, measuring her words, her gestures, her silences. I noticed how she looked at everything, the paintings, the furniture, the rugs, as if she were taking a mental inventory. I also noticed how she avoided talking about her past. She said she worked as an assistant in an office, that she had studied design, but when I asked for specific details, she would change the subject or answer with overly generic phrases. She didn't strike me as a woman looking for a family, but as someone who already had a target. My son, on the other hand, was completely captivated. I had never seen him so happy. He would prepare dinners for her, leave her flowers, and talk about her as if she were perfect. He told me he had finally found someone who understood him, who stood by him without asking for anything. He said Melina was different from all the others, that she didn't care about money, that she was with him for love. I would nod, not wanting to spoil his happiness, but deep down, something didn't add up. It wasn't because I was a jealous mother. Not at all. I wanted my son to be happy, to build his family, to have children, to fill this enormous house with voices and life, but not at any cost. The first few days with Melina in the house were calm. She moved with ease, as if she had always lived there. She quickly learned where everything was. She offered to cook, to decorate, to help at the company. She didn't know much, but she was a very good pretender. She would ask my son about the accounts, about the employees, about the projects, always with a seemingly genuine interest. But I wasn't born yesterday. I've seen that kind of curiosity before. It wasn't for love, it was for power. I tried to warn my son in a subtle way. I told him to take it slow, that he still didn't know her very well, that sometimes people aren't what they seem. He would laugh, hug me, and say I was being an overprotective mother, that he needed me to trust him, that he knew what he was doing. I would take a deep breath and let it be. I didn't want to fight with him over it. But I also couldn't ignore what I was seeing. One night, I heard Melina talking on the phone in a low voice on the patio. She was saying that she was happy, that things were going as planned, that soon she would have everything she deserved. She used a sweet tone, but with an edge that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't hear who she was talking to, but her voice was that of someone speaking not with affection, but with ambition. When she saw me, she pretended to be talking to a friend. She hung up quickly and smiled at me. She said she was planning a surprise for my son. She smiled as if nothing had happened, but it was too late. I began to watch her more closely, to focus on the small details. When my son wasn't around, her attitude would change. She would become impatient, curt, even dismissive with me. She was no longer the kind daughter-in-law from the beginning. It was as if she had dropped a mask. I also noticed that she was looking through my son's documents, his emails, his planners. One day I even saw her writing down passwords in a notebook. When I got closer, she hid it. She claimed she was making a list of recipes. It hurt my soul that I couldn't tell my son all of this, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. He was too in love, and I can't blame him. Melina knew how to handle him. She showered him with attention, praised him in front of everyone, and feigned admiration. She presented herself as the ideal woman. It was as if she had wrapped him in a soft blanket that kept him from seeing reality. My son was happy, and I was alone with my suspicions. I started writing down everything I saw, not to hurt him, but to protect him. I kept dates, noted behaviors, and recorded phrases. Because if one day everything went wrong, I wanted to be ready. A few months passed like this. Melina finished settling in completely. She changed the style of the house, redecorated several rooms, and brought in new furniture without consulting anyone. My son gave her permission for everything. He gave her credit cards, access to accounts, and even put her on some of the company's smaller projects. I watched and gritted my teeth. I couldn't intervene without being seen as a meddler. The relationship between Melina and me grew cold, cordial, but distant. She treated me with respect, but without any warmth. I didn't seek her out. I wasn't interested in pretending. I kept my place out of respect for my son, but I didn't trust her with anything. And she didn't trust me either. It was a silent war between two women who could read each other without saying a single word. Until one day, my son gathered us in the living room and announced that they were getting married in 2 weeks. He said he didn't want a huge wedding, just something elegant, intimate, but special. He said he had already made up his mind and hoped we would support him. I was speechless. All I could do was hug him and wish him the best. I swallowed all my warnings. It wasn't the time to argue. The damage was already done. All I could do was watch and wait. The wedding was beautiful, extremely expensive, perfectly organized. Melina was radiant. It was clear she loved being the center of attention. She invited few people from her side, friends who looked like they stepped out of a magazine, all the same, all empty. I felt like a stranger in my own home, but I kept my composure, not for her, but for my son. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, the house fell silent. My son went up to his room with Melina. I sat alone in the living room. I felt something inside me break. I had lost my son, not forever, but to that woman, and I couldn't do anything, just wait, because sooner or later, the truth always finds a way out. After the wedding, things changed subtly, as if the house had a new owner. Melina no longer asked. She ordered. She didn't consult. She decided. The flowers I used to calmly arrange every morning in the living room were replaced with more modern, cold, impersonal decorations. She took down my family photos from the hallway and put up abstract paintings that said nothing. She swapped the porcelain china I'd had since my son was a child for designer plates. Everything that reminded her this house had a history was replaced by her style, her taste, her presence. My son barely noticed. He smiled more than ever. He seemed calm, confident, almost naive. He'd come home from work, eat what she prepared with the help of a new cook she hired without telling anyone, sit and watch her walk around the house in expensive dresses, and go to sleep believing he had the perfect life. I said nothing. I kept watching, waiting, mentally recording every small movement. It was no longer suspicion. It was certainty. A few months passed, and one night my son called me out to the garden. He was nervous. He hugged me tightly, more than usual. He told me that Melina was pregnant. I didn't know what to say. It was as if time had stopped. I feigned happiness. I hugged him. I told him the news made me happy, that a grandchild would be a blessing. But inside, a part of me crumbled, because I knew that from that moment on, nothing could be undone. The news of the pregnancy transformed him. He would talk to his wife's belly as if there were already a child inside. He planned a new nursery, hired a designer to decorate it. He started reading books on fatherhood, on health, on how to be a good dad. And I watched him with a mixture of pride and fear, because I knew that what he was imagining was not what life was preparing for him. Melina, for her part, took advantage of every second of her new status. The pregnancy made her untouchable. She used her condition to control everything. She'd say she was tired, and he would help her get dressed. She'd say she had cravings, and he would drive halfway across the city to get them for her. She'd say the light made her dizzy, and he had the lighting in the entire house changed. I never saw a single genuine display of affection for the baby. I only heard complaints, demands, manipulation. She became colder, more arrogant. She spoke to me with superiority, as if I were a mere guest, as if my presence bothered her. Still, I endured it all. For my son, for the child on the way. When the baby was born, everything changed again. It was a boy, my grandson, my joy. I saw him for the first time in the hospital bassinet, so small, so fragile, with his wrinkled skin and eyes still closed. I felt something in my life make sense again. I cried without hiding it. My son hugged me tightly. Melina barely let me hold him for a few minutes. She said the baby needed to rest, that there were too many germs, that the doctors recommended not exposing him so much. I stepped back without arguing. I didn't want to ruin that moment, but he felt like mine from the very first second. The first few months were tough. The baby cried at night. My son slept in the guest room because Melina said she needed her space. She hired a nanny to take care of everything, but then fired her, claiming no one cared for the child like she did. The truth was, she wasn't caring for anyone. She was exhausted, yes, but also indifferent. She spent hours locked in her room on her phone, sending messages, scrolling through social media, complaining about the body she had lost, about the time she no longer had for herself. I offered to help, to take care of the child, to prepare his bottles, to walk him in the garden. At first, she accepted, but then she started setting conditions. That I couldn't hold him for more than a certain amount of time, that I couldn't sing him old songs, that I couldn't use certain lotions. She became increasingly controlling. She didn't want anyone else to have a real bond with him, not even his father. My son tried to maintain a balance. He worked more than ever. He wanted to provide everything for his new family, and he spent less and less time at home. He was missing unique moments with his son, and when he was present, Melina kept him busy with useless tasks, with errands, with requests. She always kept him away from the real problems. She wouldn't let him see what was happening. I, on the other hand, saw everything. I saw the baby waking up alone in his crib, crying with no one coming to him. I saw how she would go out to get her nails done, leaving the child with a new nanny who barely knew his name. I saw how the money flowed out of my son's account for absurd expenses, whims disguised as necessities. And above all, I saw how my son was slowly fading. He was no longer himself. He smiled less. He slept poorly. He looked exhausted, but he kept going, because he thought that's what being a father was. And in the midst of all that, the relationship between Melina and me reached a standstill. We tolerated each other, nothing more. We no longer feigned friendliness. She ignored me. I watched her. It was a cold, tense coexistence, like walking on glass. And yet, I never left that house. I couldn't, because my son lived there, and now my grandson too. Because if I left, they would be alone with a woman who didn't love them. The months went by. The child turned 1 year old. He started to walk, to babble words, to laugh with that innocence that heals everything. He would cling to me as if he had known me forever. He would hug me tightly, searching for me with his eyes when he didn't see me. I knew that no one could break that bond, no matter what Melina tried. My son remained blind, not because he was naive, but because he loved too much. He believed that everything was part of the process, that the arguments, the fatigue, the strain were normal in a family, and I understood him. But I also knew that one thing is everyday conflict, and another thing entirely is living with someone who is only with you for what you have. One day I saw him looking over a list of expenses. He was sitting in his office, his brow furrowed, his eyes fixed on the screen. I asked if he needed help. He told me everything was fine. He hugged me like he did when he was a boy and asked me to trust him. He asked me with that voice he only used when he couldn't take it anymore, and I gave him my trust. But silently, I decided I couldn't wait any longer, because I loved him too much to watch him slowly destroy himself. After the child's first birthday, the house stopped being a home and became a trap. There were no shouts, no violence, but the silence covered everything like a damp blanket. Joy disappeared between tense gestures, averted gazes, and conversations that were never truly sincere. It wasn't a visible hell. It was something worse. a prison disguised as a family. Melina started making decisions for everyone. She didn't ask for permission, she just informed. She said she wanted to remodel part of the house. She had new furniture delivered without telling my son. She changed the cleaning lady's schedule. She modified the cook's menu. She controlled my son's calendar, his meals, his meetings, even his phone calls. Everything he did first had to go through her. And he didn't realize it. He said she was doing it to help, to make his life easier. He said he didn't want to see him stressed, but she kept him busy with trivial things, pulling him away from what was important. She disconnected him from his own son, from his mother, from his own decisions. She became his shadow, his filter, his voice. If someone wanted to talk to him, they had to go through her. If someone called, she decided if he would answer. If I wanted to plan something with my grandson, I had to ask her in advance, and most of the time, I received a blunt no without explanation. I remained in that house, but every day Melina's intention became clearer. She wanted to push me out without saying it. She made little comments, dropped hints. She would say that the house needed a more modern dynamic, that grandparents sometimes complicated a child's upbringing, that each generation should have its own space. She never said it looking me in the eye, but all her darts were aimed at me. I didn't respond, not out of fear, but because I knew she was looking for an excuse. She wanted me to react, to say something out of line, to raise my voice. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Meanwhile, my bond with my grandson grew stronger, a connection no one could break. He looked for me for everything. He wanted to fall asleep in my arms, listen to my songs, eat with me. He imitated me. He smiled at me. He hugged me with an intensity that melted away any pain. I lived for him. I protected him like a she-wolf. And Melina knew it. That's why she started limiting my time with him. She claimed I was spoiling him, that I was getting him used to old-fashioned things, that I wasn't letting him develop on his own. Pure excuses. The truth is, she couldn't stand that someone loved him more than she did. My son tried to mediate. I could see he was uncomfortable when he saw us in the same room. He noticed the tension, but he didn't know how to resolve it. He asked me to be patient. He told me Melina was exhausted, that postpartum was difficult, that raising a child is draining. I understood that. That's why I held on. But I also knew it wasn't exhaustion. It was strategy. It was control. It was a game I knew all too well. The real breaking point came when Melina started getting more involved in my son's company. She asked him to include her in meetings, to explain the finances, to delegate certain decisions to her, all under the guise of being a more active partner. My son, trusting, began to give her space. He allowed her to manage one of the smaller accounts. He gave her access to his work emails. He let her sign some documents without reviewing them. And from a distance, I watched, my heart sinking, unable to stop the train that was already speeding down the tracks. One day I confronted him. I told him he was losing control of his life, that this woman was not who he thought she was, that she was manipulating him, not helping him. He looked at me with pain in his eyes. He told me he was tired of me not accepting his wife, that I had to trust his judgment, that everything Melina did was for the good of the family. I wanted to scream at him that he was blind, that he was being used, but I kept quiet, because in his voice there wasn't anger, there was desperation. I understood then that warnings were no longer enough, that words were useless, that he needed to see for himself what I already knew. So I doubled my attention. I started taking pictures of strange activities. I recorded audio of conversations Melina had with strangers when she thought no one was listening. I saved records of unnecessary expenses, strange withdrawals, packages that arrived addressed to other people. I started building a file, not for revenge, but for justice. And in the meantime, the house sank into a tense calm. No one talked about what mattered. No one said what they thought. It was like living in a minefield. Any false step could set something off. I walked carefully, never stopping my watch, never stopping my listening, because I knew the decisive moment was approaching. One day, while tidying up the child's room, I found a folder hidden in the back of a drawer. It was Melina's. It contained lease agreements for another property, in her name, a property no one knew about. There were also bank statements from accounts that weren't officially registered. Funds transferred from my son's accounts to smaller ones, recently opened. Everything was carefully disguised, but not to me. I understood what I was seeing. It was a plan, a silent plan of escape, of plunder. I clenched my teeth. I took a deep breath. I put everything in my room, without saying a word. I knew that time was on my side, because those who betray always get overconfident, and those who love always end up seeing the truth. My son still believed everything was under control, and I knew everything was about to break. More than 2 years had passed since the wedding, and although the facade was still standing, the emotional structure of that house was no longer holding up. My son didn't see it, or maybe he saw it and didn't want to accept it. He worked more than ever. He left early, came home late, sometimes without even having dinner. He slept in his office more than once a week. He said it was urgent projects, negotiations, key contracts. I knew it was emotional exhaustion. He was fleeing the atmosphere in his own home. Melina was suffocating him, and he took refuge in the only thing he still thought he could control: his work. I continued to gather evidence, not yet knowing how I would use it. It wasn't a declared war. It was a waiting game, a silent vigil. And at the center of it all was my grandson. He was 2 years old now, bright, sensitive, observant. He noticed everything. If his father came home late, he would get sad. If his mother ignored him, he would seek my lap. He was like a little emotional radar, and it pained me to see him growing up in the midst of that coldness. He didn't deserve that. One morning, my son called me from his office, with the curt tone he used when something was urgent. He told me he had to leave on a trip that same afternoon, that it was a meeting in another city with a foreign investor, that it was crucial to closing a multi-million-dollar deal. He asked me to stay with the child, that Melina would be home, but he preferred that I look after him while he was away. I noticed something strange in his voice. He said he had tried calling her several times, but her phone had been off since the night before. He asked me to please go up to see her and tell her that he was leaving, that he would be back in 3 days, and that if anything happened, she should tell me. I agreed without asking questions. I went up to the second floor and headed to the wing of the house where the master bedroom was. The door was slightly ajar. I was about to knock, but a voice stopped me. It was Melina's. She was on the phone, but not in her usual tone. She was using that sweet voice she never used with us. A voice I didn't recognize. I froze. She was saying that she loved him, that she missed him, that she couldn't stand pretending for much longer, that soon she would have the money they needed, that everything was almost ready, that he just had to be a little more patient, that her husband suspected nothing, that as soon as they closed the company's new deal, she would transfer what she promised, that the child wasn't a problem, that his grandmother would raise him, as always. I wasn't breathing. My hands were trembling. I pressed myself against the wall. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to go in, scream at her, rip that phone from her hand, but I didn't. I just waited for her to hang up. When the call ended, I heard her laugh. Then she walked out into the hallway as if nothing had happened. I hid in the shadow of a column. She didn't see me. I went back to my room, my head about to explode. I sat on the bed and closed my eyes. For a moment, I wished it was all a lie, that I had misunderstood, that it was a dream. But it wasn't. It was real. My daughter-in-law had a lover. She was planning to betray my son, to take his money, and on top of that, to leave the child with me as if he were a disposable burden. It took me an hour to compose myself, and when I did, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. I couldn't tell him yet. My son wouldn't believe me. He had defended Melina so many times. He had already accused me of being harsh, of not accepting her. If I told him what I heard, she would deny everything. She would manipulate him with tears, with lies, and he, blinded by love, would fall for it again. So I made a decision. I would say nothing. Not yet. But I reinforced my surveillance. I began to record everything. I discreetly installed small cameras in the hallway and the office. I already had recordings of conversations, screenshots of suspicious messages I found one night when she left her laptop open, but I needed more. I wanted that, when the time came, there would be no possibility for her to deny it. Before he left, my son hugged me tightly. He asked me to take good care of the child. He told me he felt something wasn't right, but he didn't know what it was. That he trusted me. That if anything happened, I should let him know without hesitation. I promised him I would. I watched him leave with a small suitcase, his face tired and his eyes sad. I knew that deep in his soul, something was already breaking. That night, Melina spoke on the phone again. I didn't know if it was with the same man, but she used the same voice. She referred to my son as the idiot. She talked about the new contract he was about to sign. She said that in 2 weeks they would have access to a larger account. That once she made the transfer, she would disappear. That she already had the other property ready. That they didn't need anyone else. I saved that recording like a relic, not for revenge, but for protection. Because I knew that audio would be the key that would change everything. Meanwhile, Melina kept pretending. She treated me with that icy courtesy. She feigned interest in the child. She gave me orders in a sweet voice, as if I were her assistant. I obeyed. I watched her. I listened to her. And I noted everything, like someone watching a wolf in sheep's clothing. The child, oblivious to it all, played with his blocks. He looked at me with those innocent eyes, and I silently swore that I would protect him until the end, even if I had to destroy his mother to do it. That recording changed everything. Not just because it confirmed what I already knew, but because the way she spoke about my son, as if he were a minor inconvenience, ignited something inside me. She called him stupid. She called him blind. She said she just had to put up with him a little longer, and then she could get rid of him. She wasn't talking about a separation. She was talking about making him disappear from her life, as if it were a finished scam. She said it while laughing, while settling into the sofa with a glass of expensive wine in her hand. As if everything my son had given her was worthless. As if he had only been another step in her ambition. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake with my eyes open, the child sleeping in my arms, wondering how much evil can fit inside a single person. I never asked for anything from life. I just wanted my son to be happy, to have a good woman, a partner. And instead, this woman who pretended to be a mother, who paraded around the house like a queen, had infiltrated it like a virus to hollow everything out from the inside. The most terrible part was that she was succeeding. The next morning, Melina acted as usual. She smiled, gave instructions, asked if the child had eaten, and locked herself in my son's office for hours. She reviewed papers, answered messages, made calls with the confidence of someone who feels untouchable. I watched her from a distance. I didn't get close. I no longer had doubts. I was just waiting. 2 more days passed. My son was still away, though he called us every night to ask about the child. His voice was tense, but he tried to sound calm. He told me the meeting had been extended, that the investor had requested more time. I replied calmly, telling him everything was fine, that the child was healthy, that he shouldn't worry. I didn't tell him anything. Not yet. On the 3rd day, something broke. Melina was on the phone again, this time later than usual, from the walk-in closet. I peeked discreetly from the hallway. I saw her sitting in front of the mirror, wearing the white silk robe she only used for special occasions. She was wearing makeup, perfume. On the call, she told the man she missed him, that she couldn't wait to see him again, that he was the true owner of her heart. She said the whole thing with her husband was a facade, that she would soon sign off on the largest transfer, that if everything went well, she would never have to see him again, that she would erase him from her life as easily as she deleted messages from her phone. That moment marked me. There was no more pain. There was no more anger. Just a terrible, absolute calm. I turned and went back to my room. I opened the small safe I had hidden among my drawers and put all the evidence inside. Audio recordings, screenshots, papers, everything. I knew I would need them soon. The next day, Melina left the house for 3 hours. She said she was going for some routine tests. 20 minutes later, the cameras showed her entering a discreet coffee shop with a burly, suited man who was not her lawyer, her brother, or a doctor. They hugged. They kissed. I saw it with my own eyes. Then they sat down to review some documents together. while she pointed to something with a gold pen my son had given her. I saved that video too. I didn't need any more proof. I had everything. When she returned, she greeted me as if nothing had happened. She asked me to prepare the child's dinner because she had a video call. Then she disappeared into her room. That night, while the child slept in my lap, my son called. I told him everything was quiet, that Melina hadn't asked about him all day. He was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something that chilled me. "Mom, I need you to be on high alert. I can't explain now, but some things aren't adding up. As soon as I get there, we'll talk in private." Then I understood that he was also beginning to see. That finally, after so much time, the blindfold was starting to come off. That was the first night in weeks that I slept peacefully, because I knew Melina's time was running out. Because in a few days, when he returned, she would have nowhere left to hide. I just didn't yet imagine what would come next, because betrayal has many layers, and Melina had not yet shown her worst face. The next day passed with a calm I knew was false. It was like the quiet before a storm. Melina seemed calmer than usual, as if something in her had already let go. She woke up late, didn't ask about the child, didn't come down for breakfast. She locked herself in her room until afternoon. When she finally came out, she had a different energy. She smiled too much, moved her body with a new freedom, and drank her coffee as if she were on vacation. I already knew she felt safe. She believed the game was won. She thought her husband was still far away, that no one had noticed anything, that she could continue her moves without anyone questioning her. But I was ready. I was no longer just watching. I was no longer just waiting. I was acting. That day, I made a decision I had been putting off. I went through my son's private office. I had the key, as I always had, because he was the one who gave it to me when he built the house. He said he trusted me more than anyone, and I had never abused that trust. But this time was different. I entered wearing gloves, out of respect. I carefully checked the drawers, the folders, the side cabinet where he kept important documents. I was looking for anything Melina might have manipulated or forged. I found more than I expected. A file with duplicate copies of contracts, but with different dates than the originals. Invoices issued to non-existent companies. Payment receipts sent to new accounts. All with my son's forged digital signature. Melina had advanced further than I thought. She was preparing the ground for a withdrawal of money, probably by claiming losses in the company. She was clearing the path so that when he discovered everything, there would be no way to recover it. I took pictures of every document, saved them on my phone, and backed them up to the cloud. I did the same with the previous videos. Then I went to the house's security system, to which I also had access. I downloaded all of Melina's entry and exit logs for the past few months. The times she left in the middle of the night, the strange visitors she had received. The lover appeared more times than I had imagined. There was even a visit in the early hours of my son's birthday. That day, he thought she was sick and sleeping early. The reality was that she was with another man in the private movie theater for hours, while he worked late to buy her a gift she never thanked him for. That night, while Melina slept, I went to her room and carefully checked her purse. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. I found another phone, one she never used in front of us. It wasn't locked, as if she never expected anyone to touch it. Inside were messages with her lover, photos, audio files, transfers, shared locations, messages in which they talked about how almost everything was under control and how soon they would be free with all the money and no witnesses. I took everything I needed and put it back in the same place. Every piece fit. There were no more loose ends. Melina was not only cheating on my son, she was robbing him, dismantling his company, his home, his family from the inside. And worst of all, she planned to leave without looking back, leaving the child as if he were just another piece of furniture. The next morning, I sat in the dining room and watched her. She drank her coffee with the same smile as always. She asked me to call the maid to clean the child's room. She told me she had a virtual meeting and needed silence. She spoke as if the house were hers, as if I were part of the staff. I said nothing. I didn't argue. I just nodded. I no longer needed to defend myself. I no longer needed to fight. Because at that moment, I was the only one who knew the whole truth. And that gave me power. That afternoon, I called a trusted lawyer. I asked for a private consultation. I explained the situation without giving names. He explained the procedures to protect my son's assets in case of a legal betrayal. He helped me start the process of safeguarding certain accounts. Using a power of attorney my son had signed years ago, I began to close off her paths, to corner her without her knowing it. My son was still away, but he was calling more often. He told me something didn't add up, that he felt a tension in the air even from a distance. I assured him that I was taking care of the child and that he needed to come back soon, that his presence was urgent. He told me he was catching an earlier flight, that he would be home the next day. That night, I slept with my grandson in my room. I didn't want to leave him for a second. Melina didn't ask about him. She said she was tired, had a headache, and locked herself away again. Maybe to write her farewell, maybe to organize her escape. I don't know. But it didn't matter, because everything was in motion. And that would be the last night Melina would believe she was in control. The sun was barely up when I heard the main gate open. I peeked out the window and saw him, my son. He was there, his suitcase in one hand and his face etched with tension. You could tell he hadn't slept the entire trip. He walked with a determined stride, not like someone returning home, but like someone returning to a battlefield. I got up without making a sound, left the child sleeping, and went down to meet him. We hugged without speaking. There was no need. He looked into my eyes, and in that moment he understood that I knew too. I took him straight to my room. We closed the door. I took out my phone. I showed him everything. The recordings, the messages, the documents, the images. He didn't say a word. He just pressed his lips together, his eyes fixed on the screen, as if a part of him was dying with each new file. When we got to the video of her kissing her lover at the coffee shop, I saw something inside him break for good. He took a deep breath, put his hands to his face, and remained silent for several minutes. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. But his body was trembling. I asked if he wanted me to confront her. He said no. He would do it himself. That he needed to see her with his own eyes. That he wanted it all to end right there, that very night. We planned the details carefully. He would leave again, as if he were still away. Melina must not know he had returned. We would wait for the right moment, for her to get comfortable and show her true colors. Only then would he walk in. My son left through the back door and stayed at a close friend's apartment. From there, he monitored everything through the cameras I had already installed. Melina spent the day as if nothing was wrong. She got dressed up more than usual. She did her hair in a style she only wore for formal dinners. She ordered takeout, but not for the house. She sent it to another address. She put on makeup, perfume, and tried on 3 different dresses. She was nervous, excited, as if she were preparing for a big event. She had no idea that event would be her downfall. At 7 in the evening, the lover arrived. He came in through the side door using a key that Melina had obviously given him. The cameras captured him clearly. He was one of the heads of security at my son's company. A tall, burly man. The kind who always seemed to be nearby at meetings, watching from the shadows. No one would have suspected him. That's precisely why she chose him. Because he was inside the circle of trust. Because he could move without raising suspicion. They went into the main living room and sat on the sofa. They opened a bottle of wine. They toasted. They laughed. She sat on his lap. She stroked his face. She told him they would soon be free. That there was just one more move to make. That her husband suspected nothing. That the house would be theirs. That the child was not a problem. That everything was already arranged with the lawyer. And then, at that very moment, my son walked in through the front door. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just appeared, silent, firm, like a contained storm. Melina froze. She didn't know what to say. She looked at my son as if she were seeing a ghost. She jumped up. She tried to explain, but her voice broke. She was spouting nonsense, that it wasn't what it looked like, that she could explain everything, that it was a misunderstanding, that he shouldn't have come back without warning. My son didn't listen to her. He didn't say a single word to her. He walked to the table, placed the phone with all the videos on it. He pressed play. The sound of her voice, of her promises to her lover, of her insults toward him, filled the room like a poison. The lover tried to get up, said he was leaving, that he didn't want any trouble. My son looked at him with contempt. He told him he was fired, that he never wanted to see him again, that he knew everything they had done, that he had copies of everything, that if either of them tried to make a legal claim, he would use every piece of evidence he had to destroy them. Melina collapsed on the floor, crying, screaming. She clutched her dress as if that could restore her dignity. My son didn't react. He looked at her with the face of a man who has died inside, not from sadness, but from disappointment, not because of the affair, but because of the wasted time. He told her he didn't want to hear another word, that he wanted her out that very night, that she shouldn't even think about taking the child, that the lawyers would handle everything, that she was no longer his wife, that to him, she had ceased to exist. I went up to the room with the child, wrapped him in a blanket, and came down just as she was leaving through the door, dragging a suitcase, crying, her makeup smeared. She turned towards us. She looked at me. She wanted to say something, but I didn't let her. I just closed the door in her face. My son knelt in front of the child. He hugged him tightly. The little one didn't understand anything, but he hugged him back, with the innocence only children have. It was there, at that moment, that I knew we had won. That the house, broken and wounded, was a home again. It wasn't a sweet victory. It wasn't. But it was just. The days following her departure were quiet, as if the house had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. Melina left without looking back, and for the first time in a long time, the air no longer smelled of expensive perfume and pent-up tension. The only things left were the cracks, the ones you can't see, but that run through everything. My son didn't talk much. He would get up early, play with his son for a bit, then lock himself in his office. There was a sort of calm in the way he moved, but it was the calm of ruins, of having lost almost everything except what matters. The meetings with the lawyers began just 2 days later. My son refused to speak with Melina ever again. Everything was handled by their representatives. She tried to make some noise. She claimed assets, wanted to negotiate for a share of the company, even hinted at fighting for custody. But she didn't get very far. The evidence was overwhelming. The videos, the documents, the messages, everything was detailed, sealed, and ready to sink any attempt at a lie. Her lawyer had no choice but to negotiate in silence. They asked for a small financial settlement to close the process without a scandal, almost like a shameful exit. My son agreed, only because he never wanted to see or hear from her again. They signed the divorce in less than 3 weeks. It was clean, fast, without a public trial, without exposure. But the damage was already done. What followed was a kind of grieving. No one in the house cried openly, but the pain was noticeable in the day-to-day. My grandson would ask about his mother with an innocence that breaks your soul. My son would answer him gently, without lies, but without resentment. He would tell him that his mom was far away, that now he would live with him and Grandma, that he didn't have to worry. The child seemed to understand in his own way. He adapted quickly, as children do when there is real love. I hugged him more than ever. I cooked for him, sang to him, let him sleep in my bed if he wanted. He became the center of my life. And in my son's eyes, every time he looked at him, you could see the mix of pain for what was lost and gratitude for what he still had. Sometimes, my son would sit at the table with me, have a coffee in silence, and then just say, "Thank you." Just that, "Thank you." And I knew what he meant. Thank you for not giving up, for staying, for seeing when he couldn't, for carrying the weight of it all without breaking. One afternoon, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. In it, he asked for my forgiveness, for not listening to me, for pushing me away, for doubting me, for believing the lies of a woman who only used him. He said that without me, there would have been nothing left, that I had saved his life, his company, his son, and that he hoped one day he could repay even a fraction of what I did for him. I replied only with a hug. I didn't need anything. I just wanted to see him live in peace. The legal process officially ended after 2 months. Melina disappeared. She never tried to communicate again. Her lover was also formally fired. and my lawyers made sure that no company information remained in the hands of third parties. My son, little by little, became himself again. More serious, yes. More cautious. But also more present. He stopped working so late. He started taking the child to and from preschool. They played together in the afternoons. They cooked simple meals. They watched movies sprawled on the couch. They started laughing again. One morning he told me he never planned to marry again. That his life was his work and his son. That love wasn't for him. I let him talk. I didn't want to contradict him. I knew he was speaking from fear, from the wound. But I also knew that time, if you don't close yourself off, fixes everything. And time, as always, took care of showing him otherwise. Several months had passed since everything had settled. The divorce was finalized. Life was resuming an almost normal rhythm, but I knew there was still something unresolved. The wound wasn't completely closed because Melina hadn't left empty-handed. I'm not talking about the money. I'm talking about something worse. The feeling that, although she was gone, she could still act from a distance, could still reappear, could still do harm. One morning I received an anonymous call. They said nothing, just breathing. I hung up. A few days later, my son noticed someone lurking near the company, a familiar car with tinted windows. There were no open threats, but we both felt it. Melina was still out there, waiting, testing, calculating. The silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. And then, an idea began to form in my mind. One I didn't tell anyone, not even my son. Not for revenge, but for protection. I didn't want that child to ever be near that woman again. I didn't want her to have the chance to show up with a new mask, an improved version, as if none of the past had happened. I wanted her to show who she really was, without cameras, without witnesses. And for that, I had to push her to the edge. One afternoon, I faked an emergency call. I acted distraught, as if I had just received devastating news. I locked myself in my room, made noise with a chair, cried in front of the mirror until I believed it myself. Then, I went out to the living room where Melina had come to pick up some things left over from the divorce. She arrived with that same arrogant air, as if she still had rights, as if nothing could touch her. I stood in front of her. I looked her in the eyes. And with a trembling voice, I told her what no mother should ever have to say. Your husband passed away last night in a car accident. He died at the hospital this morning. They couldn't save him. She didn't blink. She didn't sit down. She didn't collapse. The first thing she did was look at her phone. Then she asked me if I was sure. I answered with the same cold sadness that doctors use when there's nothing more to be said. And that's when I saw it. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Melina's soul. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't say my son's name. The first thing she did was grab her purse, take out her phone, and call her lawyer. Right in front of me, she said to activate their plan, that the foreseen event had occurred, that she needed immediate access to all joint accounts, that they should check the insurance papers, that the moves she had already planned should be executed. She hung up. She looked at me, not with sadness, not with hatred, with annoyance. She told me not to worry about her, that she knew how to take care of herself, that if my son was dead, the child was not her problem, that I should take him, that she had enough to deal with after everything that had happened. She called me a crazy old woman, told me we had ruined her life, that she wished that accident had happened sooner. And then, the thing that sealed it all happened. She pushed me, hard, with contempt. She screamed at me to get out of her sight, that this house no longer belonged to me, that everything was hers now, that she had the papers, the contacts, the means to take whatever she wanted. I let her scream. I let her get it all out, let her spit her venom without restraint. And the child, my grandson, was there, on the stairs, watching everything. At 2 years old, he understood. Not the words, but the gesture. He ran to me, clung to my leg, and looked at her with fear. And she, his mother, didn't even look at him. I went to the child's room, gathered his clothes, his teddy bear, his shoes. She didn't stop me. She yelled from the hallway to do whatever I wanted, that she had already moved on, that what was coming was hers. Money, houses, status. that my dead son was worthless now. I walked out of the house with my grandson's hand in mine, without looking back. My heart was pounding with fury, but not from sadness, from triumph, because I had finally seen what I always knew. Melina was an empty shell, and the worst part was, she didn't even feign grief. That same night, I sent my son all the recordings I made from the moment I gave her the false news. His reaction was immediate. He came back that very night. He hugged me tightly and told me he no longer had any doubt that there was no way that woman could ever enter his life again, not through the door, not through a crack. That now, more than ever, he was free. And when he walked back into the house, she was there, with her lover, the same one as always, going over papers, drinking champagne. He saw her, she saw him, and he didn't say a word. He just handed them an envelope with the final legal eviction notice from the property. He reminded them they had nothing left, and he left them there, with their defeat laid bare on the table. She looked at him, in shock, tried to cry, tried to speak, but this time he didn't listen. Because when the truth hits you head on, there are no more masks to wear. After that night, the first thing we did was change the locks on the house. Not for security, but for healing. Every door, every lock, every room where Melina once thought she was the queen was purified with small, everyday acts. We cleaned, rearranged, redecorated. Not out of vanity, but to erase the traces of a lie that had seeped into the walls. The mansion had a soul again. It was ours again. My son didn't talk much during the first few weeks. His gaze remained steady, but his heart was only half beating. Sometimes he would go out to the garden and watch his son play for hours. He wouldn't say anything, just watch him. I would see him from the kitchen. And that was enough for me, to see that there was still a light in his eyes, even if it was faint. He wasn't broken anymore. He was rebuilding. Little by little, he returned to his company. But not with the same obsession. He no longer worked until the early hours. He no longer missed breakfasts or bedtime stories. He learned how to comb his son's hair, put on his socks, prepare his afternoon snack. He became a real father. Not the distant provider Melina wanted him to be, but the man his son needed. I continued to be the pillar of the house. I took care of the day-to-day things, but above all, the soul of that home. I lit candles in the afternoons, put on soft music, cooked my grandson's favorite dishes, and maintained silence where it was needed. Not because they asked me to, but because I knew that's how spaces heal, without loud noises. Then, without looking for it, the unexpected happened. A new woman appeared in our lives. Not suddenly, not like Melina, with her spectacle and her perfume. She was slow, serene, almost invisible. Her name was Clara. She was a single mother of a 3-year-old girl. She worked as an external consultant for a project at my son's company. She had a soft but firm voice, an honest smile, and above all, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. I met her first over the phone. My son would talk about her without realizing it. He'd say, "Clara the consultant thinks this," or "Clara sent me an excellent report." And slowly, her name became a regular part of our conversations. One day he invited her to dinner at the house. It wasn't a date, it was a casual meal, or so he said. But I saw his eyes when she walked in. I saw how they lit up, how his posture softened, how he started to breathe differently again. Clara arrived without pretensions. In a simple blouse, without exaggerated makeup, with a shy daughter clinging to her leg. She brought a homemade dessert. She said she hoped we would like it. And we did. Not because of the taste, but because of what it represented. Someone who came to give, not to take. The dinner was warm. Clara didn't talk too much about herself, but she asked with sincere interest about us. She listened attentively. She laughed without overdoing it. And when she looked at my son, she didn't see him as a bank account, but as a human being. Her daughter and my grandson got along from the first minute. They played, they laughed, they shared toys, as if they had known each other before. It was beautiful and strange, because that house, which had been a war zone, was now filled with children's laughter, with little footsteps running down the hall, with soft voices. After that night, Clara visited us several more times. Sometimes for work, other times just to watch the children play. She never stayed too long, she never forced anything, and that's what made her different. She wasn't trying to get in. She was just letting herself be loved. My son started talking more, smiling more. He seemed less rigid. One day I found him cooking with Clara in the kitchen, the children playing at their feet. They didn't say anything when they saw me. They just smiled, and I knew, without needing words, that this time was different. In time, they began to date. Not to the movies or expensive dinners. They went to the park, the bookstore, the market. Simple, honest outings. They lived without hiding, but without rushing, and I respected every step. Because I knew that true love doesn't need noise, just space. After 6 months, Clara and her daughter started staying over some weekends. It wasn't a decision, it was a natural evolution. Like the seasons, like life when it isn't forced. The house adapted without resistance. The children shared a room without fighting. I made them breakfast as if they had always been there. My son didn't tell me, "Mom, I'm in love." He didn't have to. I saw it in the way he looked at her when she wasn't looking, in how nervous he got when she hugged him, in how he defended her with the same intensity he once defended Melina, but this time without blindness. And one day, he simply took my hand and said, "Thank you for not letting me fall. This time, it's real." I didn't answer. There was no need. My eyes were full of tears. Because after so much pain, so much struggle, seeing my son rebuilt, seeing my grandson happy, seeing that house once again full of life, was more than I had ever hoped for. And Clara, that simple, noble woman without masks, became a part of our family without imposing herself. Like the light that comes through an open window, without permission, but welcome. A year passed since that first dinner with Clara. A whole year without screams, without lies, without masks. The house, finally, felt like a real home, not like a battlefield disguised in luxury. The walls stopped holding bitter echoes and began to breathe. It was a new kind of calm, not empty but full, not of forced silence, but of constructed harmony. Clara and her daughter moved in with us little by little, like everything she did, without rushing, with respect, with a natural ease. There were no formal engagements or dramatic announcements, just a life that was woven together with tenderness, uniting the loose threads that Melina had left in tatters. She brought comfort where there was once only tension, patience where there was manipulation, and above all, love where there was once only self-interest. My grandson grew up surrounded by affection. He learned to share, to trust, to laugh without fear. Clara treated him as if he were her own. She never forced him to call her mom. She never placed herself above me. She was just there, consistently, sweetly. Her daughter, my new granddaughter by choice, became a part of me without asking permission. She would hug me with a confidence that can't be taught, that is only felt when the heart recognizes true warmth. My son became the man I remembered, but wiser. He no longer idealized love. He no longer got lost in appearances. He lived with his feet on the ground and his soul at peace. His company continued to grow, this time with Clara by his side as a partner, not a parasite. She didn't want a title or an office or credit cards. She just wanted to see him sleep peacefully and wake up with a smile. And that was worth more than any bank account. One day, without warning, he showed me a ring. Not to show it off, he just told me he had decided to ask her to stay forever, that he didn't need a lavish wedding, but a real commitment. Clara accepted, without tears, without feigned emotion. She just took his hand and said, "I'm already here, and I'm not leaving." That was it, and it was enough. We celebrated in the garden with an intimate dinner. I prepared everyone's favorite dishes. We put up soft lights, played slow music, and the children ran under the stars. There were no speeches, no formal gowns, just us, around a table, knowing we had walked through hell and that now, finally, we could rest. Then came more blessings. A new pregnancy. This time wanted, celebrated, shared from the very first heartbeat. A girl. My third grandchild. Clara gave birth at home, supported, cared for, loved. And when they placed the little one in my arms, I felt something that can't be explained with words. It was like closing a circle, like telling the universe that it had been worth it to hold on. Melina disappeared completely. Not a letter, not a call, nothing. Her name remained like a shadow that no longer frightens. Neither my son nor I mention her anymore. Because when life fills up with truth, the false things erase themselves. Today, I live with my 3 grandchildren, and with a woman who doesn't call me mother-in-law, but mom. Clara and I have woven a clean bond, without competition, without wounds. We respect each other, we take care of each other. She consults me on everything, but never imposes anything. She lets me be a grandmother my way, and I let her be a mother without judgment. It's a balance you can only achieve when there is sincerity. The house is no longer the same, and I'm glad, because the change didn't come from the decor or the furniture. It came from the soul. Every corner now has a new story. Laughter, games, long dinners, children's books scattered on the floor, drawings on the walls, fresh flowers in the vases, and love, real love. Silent, firm, every day. Sometimes I sit in the rocking chair on the porch, with my cup of tea and my blanket on my legs, and I listen to them live. The footsteps in the kitchen, the shouts of the children playing, Clara's voice singing while she cooks, the sound of my son reading them stories. And then I allow myself to close my eyes and think that, although it hurt, although it was a long road, although I broke many times, we survived. And we didn't just survive. We are living better than ever. Because love, when it's real, doesn't need proof, but sometimes it overcomes it all.